The Alldus podcast is brought to you by Alldus International, supplying your expert AI and digital transformation staffing needs across the US and Europe. Today, you are listening to our ServiceNow series, where we interview the best and brightest of the industry to share their story, advice, and views on the exciting world of ServiceNow and digital transformation.
Hi everybody, Mark Kelly here, Chief Customer Officer and Co-founder of Alldus. Hope you're doing really well. As far as our ServiceNow podcast series, I'm very happy to welcome Karen Warren. Karen is Associate Vice President of IT at Wesleyan University. Karen, thank you so much for your time today.
Sure, happy to be here.
Karen, tell us how you got into the world of ServiceNow and tell us maybe a little bit about your background and maybe some of your current roles or responsibility at Wesleyan.
Sure, happy to do that. Wesleyan University is a small private liberal arts university in Middletown, Connecticut. So Middletown is about 2 hours smack between New York City and Boston, to just give people a frame of reference there. And so we have about 3,000 undergraduates, 200 graduate students, residential required. So we're not a big university by any stretch of the imagination. We're a highly selective competitive university, and we do have research, so it sort of puts us in an interesting place. We have about 46 IT staff across 5 functional areas, and my purview responsibility is in the areas of academic technology, data center and network infrastructure, user services. And then the one area that I don't have responsibility for is our enterprise systems group, who runs sort of all of the enterprise applications, the ERP and things like that. Although we all work in lockstep because we provide the technological foundation for all of that stuff. So that ended up putting IT service management under me, and that initiative that we got started back in 2014 actually is when we started looking at how we were doing things. And so I ended up sort of starting that and evolving that initiative now over the past 8 years through with my teams and across the entire spectrum of information technology, not just for straight incident management. And it's kind of grown from there. So along with my other responsibilities, I'm still the primary service owner in this space, which is a little unusual for an AVP. I know the CIO thinks it is too, but as I said, we're unique in that we're small, and there are some of us out there that are smaller higher ed institutions that are making platforms like ServiceNow work without entire teams devoted to doing that.
Yeah, and don't take this the wrong way, but you're in my mind of a stereotype company that probably maximize the value of ServiceNow. I wouldn't necessarily you fit within that, but what I know is things are quickly evolving and changing. So tell us a little bit more about how you actually utilize the full value of ServiceNow.
It's funny when you say the full value, there's so much there, right? It's massive, but I think that what we've leveraged to get out of it and how we continue to evolve its usage for us is leveraging it. First of all, higher education in the United States and those who are members of Internet 2. So if any higher ed listeners out there might know what I'm talking about with Internet 2, but we have access to higher education pricing, which helps to make a platform like ServiceNow accessible to us. And so that, from a financial perspective, kind of gives us the possibility to actually license the product, but there's everything that goes with that, right? Implementation partners and working with ongoing partners to make it all work, especially where I don't have an entire staff of folks that are working for me to make it work. I think the quick way maybe, or the easiest way to answer that question is when Wesleyan first hired our CIO back in 2012, he was here about a year. We had a bit of a hodgepodge of open source and sort of self-created tools around managing support, managing our inventory, and a lot of it was very inconsistently applied and used. And when he came in, that was one of the first things he wanted to look at was cleaning this up, starting to mature us to be more systematic in the way we were supporting our end users. And he set me on the course of saying, hey, I want you to look into incident management. I want you to look into an inventory platform, and I want them integrated. So I started doing all that research and looking at that landscape. And this would have been back in 2013. And in the meantime, ServiceNow, was kind of knocking on my door and talking to me. And I was looking at all the players in that space at that time. A lot of them have gobbled each other up, but they're out there. And many of the ITSM platforms that you think of now, some of the other ones besides ServiceNow didn't even exist yet. And so as I was doing research and going down this pathway, it became clear to me that ServiceNow had the potential to be a game changer in looking at how we actually run our IT operation, but that this was a much, much bigger pathway than taking on the incident management and integrated inventory. And so, he had been on some of the demos with me, and then I just sort of laid it out for him, and we had a choice. And I said, if really you want to stay within the scope of incident management and just managing tickets and inventory, then here's who I think we should be looking at, because ServiceNow would be ridiculous overkill. We'd be way overpaying just for that. I said, but if we want to do that plus a whole lot more, I think we want to go down this road, but I want you to know this is a long evolving road. This isn't going to happen. And obviously that is the path that we took. And, now I can say 8 years later that thinking back to that days of those open source things and just kind of a hodgepodge of information to where we are now and how we look at our IT services holistically, is just night and day. But that was a long road to get there, and it continues to evolve. So I don't think to say I'm done is not a true thing.
Yeah, it's kind of a trick question to be fair, how I kind of set it up, right? Because I don't know many companies that fully utilize everything there, because it's evolving, constantly changing, and and it's really really good answer. I love the strategic view of what you took, where so many companies are closer to the short term. When you look at the value that ServiceNow is bringing to your organization and how you utilize ServiceNow without a lot of dedicated full-time resources, how do you kind of get employees on board with the implementation? And what did the journey look like across the board with one, and what feedback did you receive? How did you manage all the different types of users? Because it sounds like a little bit of a a challenging situation.
It was. So I had a mix of responses internally, and when I mean like within the IT ecosystem at our institution, and within the rest of the university and those that we support. And so first of all, we have an implementation partner that we still work with to this day. And so because we've been close partners, I have folks there that I can kind of rely on. But even with that, I will say, the budget isn't there to just kind of hand over everything to them. So we work very much in partnership. But the way ultimately that I was able to make it work was through a cross-functional team within our information technology department of folks from the enterprise systems, from academic technology, et cetera. And we work together, and we are the core of kind of making the decisions around how we are working within the platform. So if we're determining, say, categories and flows and what should come next. And with the CMDB, we talk a lot about classification and what we're doing around services and applications, things that are a little more, I don't want to say abstract, but not necessarily things coming in on the discovery layer, but broader than that as we look at our entire service catalog. And that same group of folks are the ones who are the champions within their teams, which is pivotal, because it really can't be Karen's project. And for a while, it became this like, oh, this thing that Karen is doing. But I also have the CIO at my back. And he and I being in lockstep is really important. And when I've talked to other higher ed institutions of our similar size, that's one of the first things that I talk about, because that level of executive buy-in is critical. because when you need to be able to call on, his setting the tone and the expectation, like, yeah, this is our system of record, this is what we're doing, sets a tone, and so he has all our backs on that. So it's the way we make it work. And does it mean things are slower? Sure. There are things that we'd be much farther along on if I had a small team that was just doing this and didn't have a lot of hats to wear. At the same time, I'm okay with that. We've also continued to meet and make decisions that make sense for the outcomes that we want to have. And that's a big part of our conversation is what are we trying to do here? It is so easy to get lost in ServiceNow. You can go down rabbit holes after rabbit hole.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the most seasoned professionals will still put up their hand to that one as well. So right, let's get into the nitty gritty a little bit more. So when you kind of look at some of the importance of identifying the pain points and goals within IT service management, and how does ServiceNow help to overcome or kind of address them? And what kind of roadblocks did you encounter, or maybe even underestimate during the implementation?
So internally, I had the champions, and then I had kind of what I guess I would call the naysayers, who thought that this was just going to be the next fad or the next shiny thing that IT leadership wanted to do. And so we would do that and move on to something else. I think we finally put that to rest, but that for a while was a little bit to overcome. And what did help were the folks who also kind of came to me, even one off, again, within IT, saying, you know what, we've needed this for a long time. This is getting, we're growing. Things are just evolving. In higher ed, things evolve much slower than they do in industry at large. You could be boutiquey and hands-on and whatnot. So to the hands-on point, one of the the roadblocks, I would say, that I probably underestimated, even though I knew it was going to be a challenge, I think it was a bigger one, was that our community perception of putting a system in that to them felt extremely corporate, like calling a telecom or a cable company, like, oh, what happened to that personal interaction? Now you're just going to become like this box. And so I actually just had this conversation the other day with some folks who are new to the platform that are roughly our size, a little bit bigger, but I told them as they're going on this, don't underestimate that. I said, I don't know what your culture is, but if it's anything in there like that, then start right out of the gate with what's in it for them and reminding them that you're there, and it's the same people that are behind the scenes and that are actually working the tickets and that are calling you and talking to you, and that's not going away. That's definitely something I would have done a little bit differently and tried to harder up front. It was a challenge.
And when you look at getting the team right and team members and bringing them into play and people being in the right position to be successful, can you talk me through a little bit about having the right people ready for the implementation, and what advice would you have on kind of creating that winning team?
I think it's been pivotal to have champions who are going to help deflect some of the perhaps negativity or naysayers, as I said before, particularly within the organization, and that are helping them to see what's in it for them and to say, well, hey, did you know you could do this or do that, and start kind of pulling that together. Um, it's also folks that are willing to sort of look at that big picture. I mean, in our case, right, they were people who are looking to solve what they consider to be problems, that were interested in being part of the solution and saying, hey, we can probably do this. And that is critical. I mean, certainly, I mean, everyone would say this, right? I couldn't do it by myself, but I can't, right? But no one person can. So besides the people, okay, hey, it's your job to work within it, front facing support, et cetera. It's also, in order to really leverage and understand on a larger picture, for us, we want to be able to have that picture of what are the services we're providing. And then now let's run and start getting some metrics on those services. What are the ones taking us a lot more time than others? Where are we focusing our energy, et cetera? These are not obviously new questions, but you have to have folks who, you have to be upfront with folks that these are the questions that you're trying to answer. And the only way to do that is to start building your building blocks to have the data to do that. And that just takes time. And I keep hammering that message out there and then reminding them and saying, hey, you remember all that other stuff? And being like, look what we've able to come up with now. Look at what we're looking at now, and constantly iterating on that. So I think, having those folks, not the person who's going to constantly tell you why this isn't going to work. That's not a great person to have on the team, right? But you still have to take that feedback and have people help you with that, right? I mean, that happens too.
Well, listen, we all have it. I think every organization, and almost you become better for it because you're always accountable, thinking, okay, am I going to get that person on board? How do I need to change my message to get that person on board?
Right.
Does that people feel bought in? Tell us a little bit about the future of ServiceNow, what it looks like at your company.
So interestingly enough, for a while it was very information technology centric. We were getting ourselves organized and having everything there. And after people got over the initial, oh, I'm submitting a ticket instead of sending an email, which they somehow deemed as more personal, which I wasn't sure why, but nonetheless, people started to see like, oh, they were going back. They could look up tickets because it might be a thing that they do very infrequently. This happens a lot in higher ed because our business cycle is an entire academic year. So, so there are things that people might do once or twice a year and be like, I forgot. And, it was very validating to have someone say to me, hey, it was great to be able to look up. I knew I asked you that before. I didn't even have to open another ticket. Great. Like you start to like build out that validation. Well, what happened was that started to spread to other largely administrative, I will say, areas who, much like even IT at a smaller institution, have sort of evolved and grown kind of doing their business on email, as much to tell you, like, because it was seen as is like that was how to do things. And those areas came to me. So then we started working with them and they would say, we see what you're doing. Can you help us do that? Can you help us to create something where we're tracking the volume of stuff that comes in and I can report and make decisions? And that has continued to grow in multiple ways. And now I have more front-facing student side stuff actually coming to me. Our residential life office said, hey, you know what? This email thing that we're doing is making us miserable. Like, we can make this better. And that's extremely validating. And that, of course, didn't happen all at once. I would say we were 4 or 5 years in when people started, kind of asking the question, like, can we do what you do? And so we started bringing these folks into the platform, help setting it up for them and getting them up and running. And we're continuing to do that. I actually just last week, I had somebody else come and said, I want to schedule a meeting because I'm wondering if maybe we could bring this into ServiceNow. And so those are the things that are happening. So for me, what that means, right? For us, what it means that we need to focus some energy on mobile. We have now more student-facing stuff on there. Students want to do this on their phone. We need to be more intentional about how we're delivering this to them with mobile technology. We need to be much more intentional about building out more request processes, which probably sounds very basic for folks, but it can be tough when you get started because you need to hit the ground running. And in higher ed, there are a lot of layers with built in the ServiceNow request world that are all sort of the same people in reality in higher ed. So it takes a little bit of time to figure out how to layer those and make it not too cumbersome of a process. And so a lot is continuing to happen in that space. And I'm happy to have that be the case. I'm happy to have it having a broader effect and that people are finding it efficient. And grateful. I still have people thanking me. I brought them on 3 and 4 years ago, and they'll send a note and be like, "I still want to thank you. This is just so much better," and that's very gratifying.
And it's great to hear, and you're right, it does take time, but when you get the validation and other people coming to you and also wanting to try to streamline their process and make it more effective, it gives confidence for future projects that are coming down the track too. And my final question, Karen, advice to yourself pre-implementation and to future ServiceNow users, if you were to kind of sum it up.
Sure. I actually do spend some time talking to other prospective higher ed institutions, particularly of our size. There are some very large higher ed institutions that run it out there, but there have been times that ServiceNow and our implementation partner both have asked me to talk to some folks, and sort of, a lot of those folks will say, why should we do this? This seems a little crazy. And so we go through a lot of the things that you and I just spoke about. And I would say one of the things that just happens is that usually there's a lot of pain points, and the temptation is to try to hit all your pain points up front and say, okay, this is what I'm going to do. And it just becomes like eating the elephant. It becomes overwhelming, and then you run the risk, I think, of the folks that are working within it, even if they enjoy it, feeling like it's an unsustainable way to do things. So focusing on the foundational ones that are going to allow you to build. But as I mentioned before, sort of that strategic vision, like what is right for you? Like, I'm not implying that whatever was right for Wesleyan is exactly what all the other higher eds want out of it. There are probably a lot of similarities, but figuring out, hey, where do you want to go with this? And then start building the foundation from the beginning. A lot of my peers were surprised when we started working on the CMDB immediately, concurrently with rolling out incident management. I'm not saying it was fully formed, but we started thinking and working and getting things in there. And people were like, wow, we're not getting to that till later. What I try to let people know is just even starting it to have that foundation, because having stuff in there and deciding what you're going to have and why you're going to have it will help you build a layer on top of it, and continue to layer those things towards where you want to go. You start, right? Most of the folks I talk to, or at least are starting somewhere with incident management. That's usually the most common thing. And then I think, okay, think about where you want to go with it. And I think that part is pretty critical, because as you're doing the pieces parts, you have the end in mind, even if that's a few years out. It happens, and that time flies by. So I think that's my advice. Don't try to do too much, but also think about the long game.
Yeah, I think it's great. It's great advice, because there's just you're looking at that long-term view. It's keeping you on the straight and narrow in terms of the bumps in the road that you'll get there. And I think obviously, your size, you'd like to have a bigger team to do more, but just force you to be more thoughtful. In terms of what projects you can win, why you're trying to go at them. You can't take on too much and you need to be really effective around that. And I think it's a great example for us all to listen to and adhere to as well, because you really need to pick your challenges to work across as well. Karen Warren, Associate VP of IT at Wesleyan University, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Alldus podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review. We are available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and any Android podcast of choice. You can also head over to our website, www.alldus.com, to listen to more podcasts, view our open roles, and stay up to date with industry news. Thanks for listening, and stay tuned for more great episodes coming very soon.